Viktor Malenkov forced Dr. Nathan Caldwell down onto his knees, pressed the barrel of a pistol against the back of the scientist's skull, and smiled straight into the camera. "Say goodbye to America, Mayo," he said loud enough for the whole world to hear. Below him, the elite rescue team was already trapped, pinned, bleeding in the courtyard. Command had just called the mission a failure. The hostage was as good as dead. But 2,500 meters away on a frozen mountain ridge, one woman lay behind a rifle and refused to accept that word. Before we go further, please take 1 second to subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end, because you will not believe how it finishes. And do me a favor, leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from right now so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let us begin. The order came through Claire Morgan's earpiece in a flat, tired voice, and for a moment she thought she had misheard it. "All units abort. I say again, abort the mission. Hostage is considered lost. Fall back to extraction." She did not move. She did not blink. Her cheek stayed pressed to the cold stock of the rifle, her eyes stayed locked to the scope, and the words just hung there in the freezing air like they belonged to somebody else's life. Beside her, Daniel Brooks lowered his spotting scope for half a second and looked at her. He had been her spotter for 3 years. He knew the way she breathed. He knew the way she went quiet before she did something that terrified everyone around her. "Claire," he said softly, "you heard it. They called it." "I heard it," she answered. "Then we fall back." She did not answer that. Down in the compound, through the green wash of her night optics, she watched the man they had come to save being dragged across the dirt by his collar. Dr. Nathan Caldwell, 52 years old, a father of 2, an aerospace engineer who had never held a weapon in his life and who was now being positioned in front of a camera so that a monster could turn his death into a broadcast. "He's still alive, Daniel," she whispered. "Not for long, that's the point. He's still alive." Daniel closed his eyes for a second. "Don't do this." 3 hours earlier, none of them had believed it would come to this. The briefing had been clean. It had been confident. Lieutenant Commander Michael Reynolds had stood in front of the team with a laser pointer and a satellite map in a voice that made grown men believe in the impossible. Reynolds had never lost a hostage. Not one. In 11 years of these operations, every single person he went in after had come home breathing. The men on that team would have followed him into anything, and that night they did. "Simple entry, simple extraction," Reynolds had said. "We go in quiet, we take Caldwell, we are gone before they finish their coffee. Morgan Brooks, you hold the high ground. You are my eyes. Nothing moves in that compound without you telling me first." Claire had nodded. "Copy that, sir." Reynolds had looked at her a beat longer than he looked at the others. She was used to that look. She had been getting it her entire career. It was the look that asked a question no one said out loud. "Are you sure you can do this? Are you sure you belong up there? Are you sure that when everything goes wrong, you will not freeze?" She had learned a long time ago not to answer that look with words. "Something on your mind, sir?" she had asked him, calm as still water. Reynolds had almost smiled. "No, Morgan, nothing at all. Just get up that mountain." So she had. She and Daniel had climbed for 4 hours in the dark up terrain that would have killed a careless man, hauling the rifle and the ammunition and the water and the cold weather gear until they reached a ledge of rock and ice that gave them a clean line down onto the enemy compound. 2,500 meters of open air between her position and the courtyard below. It was not a shooting distance. It was a prayer distance. It was the kind of number instructors use as a joke, the kind of shot that lived in stories and not in real life. She had set up anyway, because that was the job. You prepared for the shot you would never take, so that if the day ever came when you had to take it, your hands already knew the way. "You ever think about it?" Daniel had asked her while they waited watching the compound sleep. "Think about what? All of it. Being up here, being the only woman they ever let this far in. You ever think about how many people are waiting for you to fail?" Claire had kept her eye on the compound. "Every day," she said. "But I stopped letting it live in my head. There isn't room. Up here, there's only wind and math and the target. Everything else stays down at the bottom of the mountain." Daniel had shaken his head slowly. "You're a strange person, Morgan. I've been told." Then the lights had come on. It had happened all at once. 1 second, the compound was dark and still and asleep. The next second, floodlights blazed across every RV wall and men poured out of doorways that should have been empty, and Claire's stomach turned to ice because she understood in a single instant what she was looking at. "Daniel," she had said, her voice suddenly sharp. They knew we were coming." "What?" "Count the fighting positions, count them. Those aren't guards. Those are prepared firing points. They set this up. This is an ambush." Down below, the assault team was already moving through the outer wall, moving exactly the way they had rehearsed, moving straight into the trap that had been built for them. Claire keyed her radio so hard her knuckle went white. "Reynolds, abort the approach. Abort, this is Morgan. They are waiting for you. I say again, the compound is a trap." But it was already too late. The night below her erupted. The first explosion tore through the entry point where 4 of her teammates had just stacked up. She saw the flash before she heard it, saw bodies thrown, saw the whole beautiful plan come apart in a single breath. Then came the gunfire, not from one direction, but from everywhere. Walls and rooftops and windows, a wall of muzzle flashes that closed around the assault team like a fist. Man down, we are taking fire from all sides," someone screamed over the radio. "It's an ambush. It's a kill box, we are pinned." And in that moment, something inside Claire Morgan went very cold and very still. She stopped feeling the wind. She stopped feeling the fear that had spiked through her a second before. Her breathing dropped into a slow, deep rhythm she had trained 10,000 times, and her eye began to move across the battlefield below Hunting. "Daniel, give me targets," she said, and her voice was so calm it frightened him. "Rooftop north corner, machine gun, he's cutting the team apart." "I see him." The rifle spoke. 2.5 seconds later, the gunner on the rooftop folded and went still, and the machine gun went silent. "Got him," Daniel breathed. "Next one window, second floor west wall." "On it." Again the rifle spoke. Again a threat disappeared. Down below, one of the trapped SEALs looked up toward the mountain he could not see and shouted into his radio, "Overwatch, keep it up. You're the only thing keeping us alive down here." For 3 minutes, Claire Morgan was the difference between her teammates living and dying. She worked the rifle with a discipline that did not feel human, moving from target to target, and every time an enemy raised his head to fire on her pinned team, she took that head off the board. Daniel called them, she killed them, and for a little while it looked like the impossible plan might survive after all. Then more enemies came. They came out of buildings she had not known were occupied, from tunnels from a second compound to the east that no one had briefed. For every fighter she put down, 2 more appeared, and slowly, terribly, she understood that she could not kill them all. There were too many. This had been planned by someone who understood exactly how a rescue like this worked and had built a machine specifically to swallow it. "There's too many Daniels," she said. "I can't keep them off the team. There's too many. Keep going. Just keep going." She kept going, but her heart was starting to break because she could hear the assault team's radio traffic getting quieter, getting more desperate, the voices of men who were running out of ammunition and running out of cover and running out of time. And then she saw the thing she feared most. Through her scope, at the far side of the courtyard, a group of enemy fighters emerged from the main building, and in the center of them, half dragged and half carried, was a man in civilian clothes with his hands bound in front of him. She knew instantly who it was. She had studied his face for 3 days. Dr. Nathan Caldwell. They were bringing the hostage out into the open. "Daniel," she said quietly, "they've got Caldwell. They're bringing him into the courtyard." Daniel swung his scope. "I see him. Why would they bring him out into the middle of a firefight? That makes no sense." But Claire already understood, and the understanding sat in her chest like a stone. "Because the firefight was never the point," she said. "The firefight was the trap. Caldwell is the show." She watched as the fighters forced the doctor down onto his knees in the dirt at the center of the courtyard. She watched as a man walked out to stand behind him, a tall man who moved with the relaxed, unhurried confidence of someone who had already won. She watched as another fighter set up a camera on a tripod and angled it, carefully framing the shot, checking the light the way a person might set up a wedding video. "Command, this is Morgan," she said into her radio. "The enemy is staging an execution. I say again, they have Caldwell on his knees in the courtyard. They have a camera set up. They are going to broadcast this. Requesting guidance." There was a pause on the radio that lasted far too long. Then Reynolds' voice came back, and it was strained in a way she had never heard from him before. Morgan, hold position. Do not fire on that group. Repeat, do not fire. The risk is too high. Sir, they are about to execute the hostage. I know what they're about to do, Morgan. His voice cracked just slightly, and that crack told her more than any words could have. Michael Reynolds, the man who had never lost a hostage, was watching his perfect record die in real time, and there was nothing he could do about it from where he was pinned. The distance is over 2,000 meters. The target is moving. If you take that shot and you miss, you hit Caldwell, and then you've killed the man we came here to save. Hold your fire. Claire kept her eye on the scope. In the circle of glass, the tall man behind Caldwell reached down and pulled the doctor's head back by the hair. And even from that impossible distance, even through all that cold air, Claire could see the fear on Nathan Caldwell's face. She could see his mouth moving. She could see that he was praying or begging or maybe just saying the names of his children. Daniel, she said. Who was that man behind him, the tall one? Daniel checked the reference photos they had memorized. That's Malenkov, he said. Victor Malenkov, former intelligence officer. He's the one who runs this whole operation. He built the army, he planned the kidnapping, all of it. He's the head of the snake. The head of the snake, Claire repeated softly. On the radio command came back, and this time it was not Reynolds. It was the operation commander himself, the man running the whole mission from a room far away with a wall of screens. His voice was flat and final and carried no hope in it at all. All units, this is actual. The hostage is considered lost. I am declaring this mission a failure. All units abort and fall back to extraction immediately. Do not engage the execution site. That is a direct order. Get my people off that mountain and out of that valley. Bring my living home. Caldwell is gone. And there it was, the order every soldier feared hearing. Not the order to fight, the order to stop fighting. The order to accept that someone was going to dash in and that there was nothing left to do but walk away and let it happen. Copy, Reynolds said hollowly over the radio. All units, you heard actual. We are aborting. Morgan Brooks, pack up and start your descent. That's an order. Which was how Claire Morgan came to be lying on a frozen ledge 2.5 kilometers above a dying man with the word abort ringing in her ears and her cheek still pressed to a rifle she had been ordered to put away. Claire, Daniel's voice was gentle but urgent. Claire, we have to go. You heard him. You heard actual himself. It's over. He's still alive, Daniel. I know he is, but if you take that shot and you miss, you become the person who killed Nathan Caldwell. Not Malenkov, you. And you don't come back from that. Not ever. He put his hand near her shoulder, not touching her, just close. Nobody could make this shot. Nobody in the world. 2.5 kilometers moving target a hostage 2 feet away. It's not a matter of being brave. It's a matter of physics. It cannot be done. Claire did not answer him. In her scope, Malenkov was speaking to the camera now. She could not hear the words, but she did not need to. She had seen enough of these to know the rhythm of them. The speech, the accusations, the little pause before the end. And in that silence, lying on the ice, Claire Morgan's mind did something strange. It went very quiet, and into that quiet came a memory. She was 12 years old at a shooting range with her father, a soft-spoken man who had never raised his voice in his life and who had taught her to shoot the way other fathers taught their children to ride a bike. She remembered him kneeling beside her, his hand steady on her small shoulder, his voice patient. The shot is never about the target, Claire, he had told her. Anybody can point a rifle at a target. The shot is about you. Can you be still? Can you be calm when everything inside you is screaming? Can you find that one quiet second, that one clean breath, and live inside it long enough to do what needs to be done? That's the whole thing, honey. That's the whole thing right there. She had not understood him then. She understood him now. Daniel, she said quietly, what's the wind doing? Daniel went absolutely still. Claire, no. What is the wind doing? Claire, they gave a direct order. From actual. You take this shot, you don't just risk the mission. You risk your whole life. Your career, your freedom, everything. They will put you in front of a board and they will bury you, even if you hit, even if you're right. His voice was shaking now, especially if you're right. Claire's breathing did not change. Her eye did not leave the scope. I know what they'll do, she said. I've always known what they're going to do. That was never the question. She swallowed. The question was only ever whether I could live with walking away while a good man dies because a number on a range card said I wasn't allowed to try him. And I can't, Daniel. I can't live with that. So I need you to tell me what the wind is doing." For a long moment, Daniel Brooks said nothing. Down below, Malenkov reached to his hip and drew a pistol and racked the slide, and the sound of it was too far away to hear. But Claire saw it, saw the metal catch the floodlight, and something in her went perfectly, terribly calm. And then Daniel let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for his entire life and lifted his spotting scope and pressed his eye to it and became in that instant exactly the man she needed him to be. "All right," he whispered. "God help us both. Crosswind left to right, mid-valley gusting. Temperature is dropping fast. You're going to be fighting the elevation and the cold air the whole way down." His voice found its rhythm now, the old familiar rhythm, spotter and shooter, the two of them alone against the impossible. "This is the hardest shot anyone has ever tried, Claire. I want you to know that. Whatever happens, I want you to know that." "I know. He'll never sit still. Malenkov. He's pacing. You'll have to read where he's going to be, not where he is." "I know. The bullet's going to be in the air for almost 3.5 seconds. 3.5 seconds, Claire. Anything can happen in 3.5 seconds." "I know, Daniel." She adjusted the elevation on her scope click by click, her fingers moving with a slow certainty that did not match the pounding of her own heart. "I know all of it. Just stay with me. Whatever you do, just stay with me and keep talking." Below, Malenkov handed something to one of his men and turned back toward Caldwell and raised the pistol and pointed the camera turned to catch the moment, and the whole compound seemed to hold its breath for the thing that was about to happen. And on the mountain in the cold and the dark, Chief Petty Officer Claire Morgan settled behind her rifle and slowed her heart and began to do the only thing she had ever truly known how to do, which was to become perfectly still in the exact moment when the entire world was falling apart. She thought about every voice that had ever told her she did not belong here. The instructors who had watched her with folded arms waiting for her to quit. The men who had gone quiet when she walked into the room. The ones who had said not to her face but close enough for her to hear that a woman had no business in a place like this, that when the real moment came, she would not have what it took. She thought about all of them and then she let them go one by one the way you release a breath, because this was not about them. It had never been about them. She was not going to pull this trigger to prove anything to anyone who had ever doubted her. She was going to pull it for the man on his knees in the dirt who had children waiting for him, who had never hurt anyone in his life, who was about to die on camera in front of the whole world unless one person on one mountain decided that the word abort was not the last word after all. "Malenkov's talking again," Daniel murmured. "He's stalling for the camera. That's good. That's more time. Where's my window? When he steps back to pull the trigger, he'll plant his feet. That's your window. Half a second, maybe less. He goes still to fire, and that's when you fire." Daniel's voice dropped to almost nothing. "You'll have one chance, Claire. If you miss, there is no second shot before it's over. One breath, one trigger pull, everything on it." "One breath," she repeated. "One trigger pull." Her finger found the trigger, not pressing yet, just resting the way her father had taught her, feeling the metal becoming part of it. Down in the courtyard, Nathan Caldwell lifted his head one last time and looked out into the darkness beyond the floodlights, out toward the mountains he could not see, as if some part of him knew that somewhere out there, against every order and every reasonable measure of what was possible, one person had refused to leave him behind. He could not have known her name. He could not have known she existed. But he looked out into the dark all the same. And in the dark, she looked back at him through a thin circle of glass, and she made him a promise that he would never hear. "Not tonight," she thought. "You are not dying tonight." "Claire," Daniel breathed. "He's moving into position. Get ready." Her heartbeat slowed until she could count the space between each beat. The wind pressed against her face, and she read it and answered it and let it become part of the equation. The cold vanished. The fear vanished. The mission, the order, the board that would one day judge her, all of it vanished until there was nothing left in the entire world except a rifle, a breath, a distance, and a man who was about to die if she was even 1 inch, even one heartbeat, even one whisper of wind wrong. Malenkov raised the pistol. He aimed it at the back of Nathan Caldwell's head. He looked into the camera, and he began to count. On the mountain, Claire Morgan let half her breath escape, held the rest, and settled her finger onto the trigger. And in the last silent second before the world changed, a single thought moved through her mind, clear and quiet and certain in her father's patient voice. "The shot is never about the target, Claire. The shot is about you. She found that one quiet second. She lived inside it, and she began so slowly that time itself seemed to slow with her to squeeze. The rifle fired. The sound of it slammed across the mountain and rolled down into the valley. And then there was nothing. Nothing but the wan, unbearable silence of a bullet traveling through the dark. 3.5 seconds. Claire had put the round into the air, and now it belonged to the wind, to gravity, to the cold, to 100 forces she had accounted for and a dozen more she could only pray about. And there was not one single thing she could do to change its path now. It was gone. It was out of her hands. It was the truest kind of helplessness. There is the helplessness of having done everything you can and having to wait to find out if it was enough. Come on, Daniel whispered beside her, his eye jammed against the spotting scope. Come on, come on, come on. 1 second. Down in the courtyard, Malenkov's mouth was still moving. He was still counting. He did not know. He had no idea that death was already in the air, screaming toward him from a mountain he had never bothered to look at. 2 seconds. Claire did not breathe. She had not breathed since the trigger broke. Her whole life had narrowed down to a circle of glass and a man on his knees in the space of one held breath. 3 seconds. Please, she said, and it was not a word she had chosen to say. It just came out of her, small and human and afraid. Please. And then Viktor Malenkov's head snapped sideways and his body twisted, and the pistol flew out of his hand and spun away into the dirt, and he dropped straight down into the courtyard like a puppet whose strings had all been cut at once. For 1 full second, nobody in the compound moved. Nathan Caldwell was still on his knees, still braced for the shot that was supposed to end him. His eyes squeezed shut, his lips still moving, and it took him a moment to understand that the weight of the man behind him was gone, that the hand in his hair was gone, that he was somehow impossibly still alive. Then the courtyard erupted into chaos. He's down, Daniel said, and his voice cracked in half. Claire, he's down. Malenkov is down. You hit him. Oh my God, you hit him. Claire finally let the breath out of her body. It came out ragged and shaking, and with it came something she had been holding for a lot longer than 3.5 seconds. Something she had been holding for her whole career, and for one dizzy moment, the scope swam in front of her eye. She blinked it clear. She did not have time to feel this, not yet. Confirmed kill, she said, and her voice was hoarse. Confirmed, he's not moving. He's done. Daniel let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. That was 2.5 kilometers, Claire. That was 2,500 meters and a moving target and a hostage right there, and you made it. Do you understand what you just did? Do you understand? Not yet, Daniel. She was already back on the scope, already hunting. It's not over, look. Because it wasn't over. Down in the courtyard, the thing she had been afraid of was already starting to happen. When Malenkov fell, his men did not scatter the way a leaderless mob scatters. They froze for a heartbeat, and then a voice rose up among them, an older fighter, a second in command, roaring orders in a language Claire did not speak but understood perfectly because the meaning of it was written in the way the enemy fighters snapped their weapons back up and turned all of them at once toward the man in the center of the courtyard, toward Nathan Caldwell. They're going to kill him anyway, Claire said, and ice went through her all over again. Malenkov's dead, but they're going to finish it. They don't need him alive anymore. Daniel, they're going to kill him right now out of pure spite. Reynolds, she barked into the radio, all discipline, now all business. Reynolds, Malenkov is down. I say again, Malenkov is KIA, but the enemy is repositioning to execute the hostage. This is your window. It's the only one you're going to get. Move now or he dies anyway. There was a crackle on the radio, and then Michael Reynolds' voice came back, and it was completely transformed. The hollowness was gone. The defeat was gone. In its place was something hard and fast and alive. Say again, Morgan, did you just tell me Malenkov is down? I put him down myself, sir. His command structure is in chaos. They're leaderless, and they are panicking. You will never get a better moment than the next 10 seconds. Go. And Lieutenant Commander Michael Reynolds, the man who had never lost a hostage, the man who had just spent the worst 90 seconds of his life listening to his own command, declare his mission a failure, made his choice. All units, this is Reynolds. Belay the abort. I say again, belay the abort. We are back in the fight. His voice rose over the sound of gunfire. Target is down. Enemy is broken. We are going to get our man. On me. On me. Move. What happened next happened faster than Claire could fully track, and she had the best view of anyone alive. The trapped SEAL team, the men who had been pinned in a kill box, bleeding and rationing their last bullets and preparing to die, came up off the ground all at once, like something out of a legend. The enemy had made a fatal mistake. In turning to finish Caldwell, they had turned their backs on the very men they had cornered. And now those men who had been given nothing but bad choices for the last 10 minutes were suddenly handed the one thing they needed, which was a broken and disorganized enemy who had stopped paying attention to them. "Overwatch, cover our advance," Reynolds shouted. "Morgan, keep those execution fighters off Caldwell. We are 30 seconds out." "Copy covering," Claire said. And then she went back to work, and this time it was not one impossible shot. This time it was the thing she had trained her whole life for, the thing she was better at than almost anyone alive, which was reading a battlefield and taking it apart one problem at a time. The fighter with his rifle raised toward Caldwell's back. Gone. "Target down," Daniel called. "Next left of him, he's aiming too." The second fighter turning toward the doctor. Gone. "Down. You're keeping him alive, Claire. You're keeping him alive with every shot. Keep going." A third enemy scrambling toward the hostage, this one closer. Close enough that Claire's stomach clenched, because if she was even slightly off the round, would go through the fighter and into the man behind him. She read the wind. She read the distance. She read the tiny slice of space between a killer and the innocent man he was rushing toward, and she threaded the round through that space, and the fighter dropped and Caldwell did not. "Clean," Daniel breathed. "Clean. God, that was clean. He's still down there praying he doesn't even know it's you keeping him alive." He didn't. Nathan Caldwell was still on his knees in the middle of the courtyard, hands bound, head down, and around him men were falling, and he did not understand why, only that every time death reached for him, something reached back from the dark and stopped it. The assault team hit the courtyard at a dead sprint. Two of them peeled off toward Caldwell, while the rest laid down a wall of fire, and Claire watched a young operator, whose name she did not know, slide the last few feet on his knees to reach the doctor, grab him by the collar, and put his own body between Caldwell and the enemy guns. "I've got him, the operator yelled over the radio. "I've got Caldwell, he's alive. He's unhurt, I've got him." And on the mountain, 2.5 kilometers away, Claire Morgan finally allowed herself one single second of feeling, and in that second, her eyes filled and her throat closed, and she had to look away from the scope because she could not see through it anymore. "We got him, Daniel," she whispered. "We got him back." "You got him back," Daniel said. "You, nobody else. You." But the fight was not finished, and the mountain was about to remind them of that in the cruelest way possible. Because the enemy had one card left to play, and they played it now. Claire heard it before she saw it. A low, grinding, mechanical roar that rose up from the far side of the compound, a sound that did not belong to any weapon a man could carry, a sound that made every hardened operator in that courtyard turn their head at once. She swung her scope toward it, and her blood went cold for the third time that night. "Daniel," she said slowly, "tell me I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing." Daniel found it in his own scope, and he was quiet for a long, terrible moment. "That's an armored vehicle," he said. "But where in the hell did they get an armored vehicle?" It came grinding through a gap in the far wall, heavy and slab-sided, and mounted with a gun that could turn the entire assault team into memory in about 4 seconds, and it was rolling straight for the courtyard, straight for the exposed men who were trying to drag Nathan Caldwell to safety, and there was not one thing on that battlefield that could stop it. "Reynolds," Claire said, and she could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "You've got an armored vehicle inbound from the West Heavy Weapon. It is coming right for your position. Do you have anything for it? Anything at all?" There was a pause, and in that pause, she heard Reynolds ask his team the same question, and she heard the answer come back, and she heard it in the silence. "Negative, Morgan," Reynolds said, and the fear was back in his voice now. A different fear. The fear of a man who has just gotten his hostage back and is about to lose him and everyone else along with him. "We came in light and quiet. We've got nothing that touches armor. That thing is going to be on top of us in 20 seconds, and we have no way to stop it and no way to run. The extraction route is on the other side of it. We are boxed in." 20 seconds. Claire looked at the vehicle grinding toward her team, and she looked at the men trapped between it and the wall, and she looked at Nathan Caldwell, Olivia breathing, saved about to die anyway because of a machine, and something rose up in her chest that was not fear, and was not doubt, it was refusal. Daniel, she said, I need you. Claire, that's armor. That's a rifle round against steel plate. You can't punch through that. Nobody can. The round will just spark off the... I'm not trying to punch through it. She was already reaching for the case beside her, already changing ammunition, her fingers moving fast and sure. I'm not going to kill the vehicle. I'm going to kill its ability to fight. Daniel stared at her. What are you talking about? Every machine has a weakness. Every one. That thing is a threat because it can see, and it can move, and it can shoot. So I take one of those away. She chambered the new round and settled back down behind the rifle, her breathing already dropping back into that deep, slow rhythm. The gunner has to look through an optic to aim that weapon. The driver has to look through a vision block to steer. There are seams, there are weak points. There is always a weak point, Daniel. You just have to be willing to hit something the size of a coffee cup from 2.5 kilometers away while it's moving. That's insane. So was the first shot. She almost smiled. Give me the vehicle's speed and heading, fast. I've got maybe 15 seconds before it's in firing position. For half a second, Daniel Brooks did not move, and Claire understood that he was standing at the edge of the same cliff she had already jumped off. And then for the second time that night, he chose to jump with her. All right, he said, and his voice steadied. It's moving at a walking pace, angling left to right across your front driver's side facing you. If you're going for a vision block, you want the front left. It's going to slow down when it reaches the courtyard to bring the gun to bear. That's your window. That's the moment it stops. When it stops, Claire repeated, copy. The vehicle ground forward. In the courtyard, Reynolds was screaming at his men to find cover that did not exist to press themselves against a wall that would not save them. And Claire could hear the panic threading through the whole team now, because they could all see the thing coming and they all knew there was nothing to be done. Morgan, whatever you're going to do it now, Reynolds shouted. It's bringing the gun around. It's going to fire. We are out of time. Slowing down, Daniel called. It's slowing. Wait for it. Wait. The armored vehicle rolled to a stop at the edge of the courtyard, and its heavy gun began to swing toward the huddle of men who had no way to run. Now, Claire, now. And Claire Morgan, who had already done the impossible once tonight, exhaled half a breath, held the rest, and did it again. The rifle fired. The round crossed 2.5 kilometers of freezing air in a little under 3.5 seconds, and this time Claire was not aiming at a man. She was aiming at a slit of reinforced glass the size of a paperback book set into the front of a hostile, armored vehicle behind which sat a driver who had no idea that anyone in the world could reach him there. She had accounted for the wind and the drop and the cone and the angle and the tiny leftward crawl of the vehicle as it settled, and she had put the whole of her impossible skill into a target that would have made most snipers laugh. The round struck the vision block dead center. It did not go through. It did not have to. The reinforced glass shattered into a spiderweb of white fractures blinding the driver. And inside the vehicle, there was a burst of chaos, and the heavy gun that had been swinging toward the SEAL team suddenly stopped, hung motionless, and then sagged off target as whoever was inside lost their reference and their nerve at the same time. It stopped. Reynolds' voice came over the radio, disbelieving. The gun stopped. It's not tracking. What did you? Morgan, did you just blind an armored vehicle from the top of a mountain? Move your team, Claire said. Move them now while it's blind and confused. It can't see you and it can't aim. That won't last. Go. And they went. The SEAL team came up off the wall and moved, dragging Nathan Caldwell with them, pouring around the flank of the blinded vehicle while it groped uselessly at a battlefield it could no longer see. Claire and Daniel covered them the whole way, dropping every enemy fighter who tried to close in, and within 90 seconds, the entire team plus the hostage they had come so far to save had cleared the compound wall and were moving into the broken ground beyond it, out of the kill box at last alive. We're clear, Reynolds said, and his voice was shaking with something that might have been disbelief and might have been grief and might have been animal relief. We are clear of the compound with the package. Caldwell is alive. All my people are alive. Morgan Brooks break down and displace will rendezvous at the fallback point. In Morgan, he stopped. For a moment there was nothing but his breathing on the radio. I don't have the words for what you just did. I'm not sure there are any. Claire did not answer right away. She was already breaking down her position, already packing the rifle away with hands that had started only now to shake. The stillness that had carried her through the last 20 minutes was leaving her body, and in its place came everything she had been holding off, all the fear and the strain and the sheer impossible weight of what she had just done. And she had to stop for a second and press her forehead against the cold rock and just breathe. "We should move," Daniel said quietly beside her. He was watching her, and there was something careful in his eyes now, something that had not been there before. "Claire, you okay?" "No," she said honestly, "but I will be. Help me get this packed." They came down off the mountain the way they had gone up in the dark, in the cold, hauling the gear that had just changed the outcome of a mission the entire chain of command had written off as dead. It took them hours. The terrain that had nearly killed them on the way up did its best to kill them again on the way down, and by the time they linked up with the rest of the team at the fallback point, the first gray light was starting to bleed into the eastern sky, and Claire Morgan was so tired she could barely feel her own hands. The team was waiting for them. She saw them before they saw her. A cluster of exhausted, filthy blood-streaked men, and in the middle of them, wrapped in a blanket someone had given him, sat Nathan Caldwell. Alive, breathing, shaking, but alive. And when the doctor saw the two figures coming down off the mountain, something in his face changed because someone had told him. Someone had told him where the shots had come from. Someone had told him that the reason he was going to see his children again was a person he had never met lying on a ledge 2.5 kilometers away who had refused a direct order to let him die. He got to his feet. His legs did not want to hold him, and two of the operators moved to steady him, but he waved them off and stood on his own, and he walked toward Claire Morgan on unsteady legs, and he stopped in front of her. For a long moment he could not speak. He just looked at her. The small, tired woman with a rifle case on her back and dirt on her face and eyes that had seen the inside of something most people never have to see. "You're the one," he finally managed, "on the mountain. You're the one who," his voice broke completely. "They said it couldn't be done. They said the distance was impossible. They said the order was to leave me. And you..." He stopped and he swallowed, and tears were running openly down his face now, and he did not seem to notice or care. "I have 2 kids, a boy and a girl. I was on my knees down there, and I was saying their names because I thought those were the last words I was ever going to say, and then that man just fell. And I didn't understand. I didn't understand until they told me. It was you the whole time keeping them off me. I felt it. Every time one of them came for me, something stopped them, and it was you." Claire opened her mouth and found that she did not have anything to say. She had done this her entire career. She had saved lives from a distance, from behind a rifle, from far enough away that she never had to see the faces of the people she saved. She had never once stood face to face with one of them. She had never once had to hold the weight of a saved life in her own 2 hands. "You don't have to say anything," Nathan Caldwell said, and he reached out and took her hand in both of his, and his hands were shaking harder than hers. "I know you're not supposed to talk about it. I know they'll probably tell me I imagined the whole thing. But I need you to hear this from me once before they take it all away and lock it in a file. My children have a father tonight because of you. Whatever happens to you now, whatever they say you did wrong, you remember that. You gave 2 kids their dad back. There is no order in the world worth more than that." And Chief Petty Officer Claire Morgan, who had just made the 2 most impossible shots of her life, who had not flinched, who had not broken, who had been perfectly still while the whole world came apart, felt her composure finally give way. Not on the mountain, not behind the rifle. Here in the gray dawn, with a stranger's shaking hands wrapped around hers. "You're welcome," she whispered. It was all she had. "You're welcome. Go home to them." Reynolds appeared at her shoulder. He had been standing back, giving them the moment, and now he stepped forward, and Claire braced herself because she knew what was coming. She had known it would be coming since the second she chose to ignore the abort order. The gratitude was the easy part. Now came the reckoning. "Morgan," Reynolds said, his face was unreadable. "You disobeyed a direct order from Actual himself, in front of the entire command net. You understand that?" "Yes, sir, I understand that." "You understand what happens now. It's not up to me. It's not up to anyone in this valley. There's going to be a review. They're going to pull the recordings, they're going to reconstruct every second, and they are going to ask you to explain in a room full of people with stars on their shoulders why you thought you knew better than the entire chain of command. He paused. Some of those people are going to want to make an experiment out of you. Do you understand that too? Claire held his eyes. She was too tired to be afraid, and maybe that was a mercy. Yes, sir, I understood all of that before I took the shot. Reynolds studied her for a long moment, and then something in his face shifted. Something loosened, and he let out a slow breath and glanced over at Nathan Caldwell, who was still standing there wrapped in his blanket AI watching them. You know what the worst part is, Morgan? Reynolds said quietly so only she could hear. The worst part is that I was ready to walk away. I gave the order to my own team to fall back. I was going to leave that man because the math said we had to, because a general in a room 1,000 miles away said the risk was too high. 11 years. 11 years and never lost one, and I was ready to lose him, and I would have lived with it because that's the job. He shook his head slowly, and then some sniper on a mountain decided the job could go to hell. And she was right. That's the part that's going to keep me up at night. Not that you disobeyed, that you were right and I wasn't. Sir, don't. He held up a hand. Whatever happens in that room, Morgan, I'll be in it too. And when they ask me what I saw, I'm going to tell them the truth. I'm going to tell them that the entire United States chain of command gave up on Nathan Caldwell and that one chief petty officer didn't. Let them do what they want with that. He turned to go, then stopped and looked back at her one more time. For the record, he said, that was the finest shooting I have ever seen in my life, both of them. I'd have said they were impossible. I'd have bet my career they were impossible. A ghost of something crossed his face. Turns out you already bet yours, and you won. The extraction helicopters came in low out of the brightening sky, and the team loaded aboard, and Nathan Caldwell was strapped in with a medic on either side of him, going home to a son and a daughter who did not yet know how close they had come to growing up without a father. Claire sat across from him with her rifle case between her knees, and somewhere over the mountains, he looked up and caught her eye. And he did not say anything, because there was nothing left to say, but he pressed his hand flat against his own chest over his heart, and he held it there, and he looked at her. And she understood what he meant. She pressed her own hand over her heart, and she held it there, and she looked back at him. That was the whole conversation. It was the only one that mattered. The helicopters carried them up and away out of the valley where a mission had died and been resurrected in the space of a single held breath, and Claire Morgan leaned her head back against the cold metal of the airframe and closed her eyes and let herself, for the first time in many hours, simply feel the fact that she was alive, and that because of her, so was he. But even with her eyes closed, even with the exhaustion pulling her down towards sleep, one thought would not leave her. It circled in the back of her mind, quiet and cold, and certain the way the wind had circled the valley all night long. She had saved him. She had done the impossible twice, and she had saved him. And now she was going to have to stand in a room full of powerful men who had already decided she was wrong and answer for it. The room they put her in had no windows, and Claire Morgan understood the message in that before anyone said a single word to her. She had been back on American soil for exactly 9 days when the summons came. 9 days of debriefs and medical checks and long silences from people who used to look her in the eye. 9 days of watching her own team get quieter and more careful around her, not because they had turned on her, but because they knew what was coming and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it. And now here she was sitting alone at a long table in a room deep inside the Pentagon, waiting for the people who would decide whether the rest of her life was worth anything at all. She was not nervous. That surprised her a little. She had expected to be nervous. But she had made her peace with this room a long time ago, back on the mountain in the half-second before she chose to ignore the order. She had known then that this room was the price. She had chosen to pay it. There was a strange kind of calm in that, the calm of a person who has already accepted the bill. The door opened at exactly the appointed time, and 4 senior officers filed in, and Claire rose to her feet the way she had been trained to, and she did not sit down again until they told her to. The man at the center of the table was a rear admiral named Harlan Voss, and Claire had heard of him the way you hear of weather systems. He had a reputation. He was not cruel, people said, but he was rigid, and he believed in the chain of command the way other men believed in God. And it was said that in 30 years of service, He had never once in his life been a rule for anyone, including himself. If they had wanted someone to go easy on her, they would not have sent Voss. They had sent Voss because Voss did not go easy on anyone. Chief Petty Officer Morgan, he said, opening a folder in front of him without looking up. Do you know why you're here? Yes, sir. Tell me. On the night of the operation, sir, I received a direct order to abort and to hold my fire. I disobeyed that order. I engaged a target I had been specifically told not to engage, and then I continued to engage without authorization until the mission was complete. Voss finally looked up at her. His eyes were pale and flat and gave away nothing. You understand that you've just confessed to the entire charge without any of us saying a word. I'm not here to argue about what I did, sir. I know what I did. I did it on purpose. There was a small shift in the room. The three officers flanking Voss glanced at one another, and Claire caught it, that little ripple, because she had spent her whole life reading tiny movements at great distances. They had expected her to fight. They had expected excuses, justifications, a lawyer's careful dance around the facts. They had not expected her to simply lay it all on the table and stand there. That's an unusual position for a person in your situation, Voss said slowly. I don't have an unusual position, sir. I have a very simple one. I was ordered to let a man die, and I decided not to let him die. Everything after that is just details. Everything after that, Voss repeated, and there was an edge in his voice now, is a chain of command, is discipline, is the difference between a military and a mob. You don't get to decide which orders you follow, Chief. The entire structure of this institution collapses the moment we let individual operators overrule their commanders based on what they personally feel is right in the moment. You know this. It was taught to you on the first day of your career and every day since. Yes, sir. Then explain to me why you thought you were the exception. Claire took a breath. This was the question. She had known it would come, had turned it over in her mind 1,000 times in 9 sleepless nights, and she had decided that when it came, she would not reach for anything clever. She would just tell the truth. I didn't think I was the exception, sir. I thought I was the last one who could do anything. Those are different things. Elaborate. When Actual gave the order to abort, he gave it based on the information he had, and the information he had was that the shot was impossible. And by every reasonable measure, sir, he was right. The distance was over 2,000 meters. The target was moving. There was a hostage 2 feet away. Any range officer in the world would have told you the odds of making that shot without killing the hostage were somewhere near 0. She kept her eyes level with his. But Actual was 1,000 miles away looking at a screen. He couldn't see what I could see. He couldn't feel the wind I was feeling. He couldn't read the target the way I was reading him. He was making the correct decision with incomplete information. I was making a different decision with complete information. And the only person on the entire planet who knew whether that shot was actually possible was me lying behind that rifle with my eye on that scope. So you substituted your judgment for his. I substituted the only judgment that could actually see the shot, sir. If I had followed the order, a man would be dead. And the reason he'd be dead is that a decision about a shot was made by the one person in the chain who couldn't see the shot. She paused. I've thought about this every hour of every day since it happened, sir. And I keep arriving at the same place. If I could go back, knowing everything I know now, knowing I'd end up in this room, I would take that shot again. Every single time. Because the alternative was watching a father of 2 get executed on camera while I did nothing, and I would not have been able to live with that. Not for one day. The room was very quiet. One of the other officers, a captain, seated to Voss's left, leaned forward. He was younger than Voss, and there was something in his face that was not quite hostility. Chief Morgan, he said, let me ask you a harder question. What if you had missed? And there it was. The question underneath all the other questions. Claire had been waiting for it. If I had missed, sir, and the round had struck the hostage, then I would be sitting in this room having killed the man I was sent to save. And there would be nothing anyone could say in my defense, and there would be nothing I could say in my own defense either. I know that. Her voice did not waver. That's the part people don't understand about a decision like the one I made. I wasn't gambling with my career. I made my peace with losing my career before I ever touched the trigger. I was gambling with his life. That's the real weight of it. If I'd been wrong, and I'd have been the one who killed him. And I chose to carry that risk anyway because the certainty of him dying if I did nothing was worse than the possibility of him dying if I tried. The captain sat back slowly. You're telling us Voss said that you knowingly took a shot that had it gone wrong would have made you personally responsible for the death of Dr. Caldwell. Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm telling you. I'm not going to stand here and pretend it was a safe bet because it wasn't. I'm not going to pretend I was certain because certainty doesn't exist at that distance. I did the math, I read the wind, I found the highest probability I could find, and then I accepted that probability wasn't the same as a promise. And I fired anyway. She let out a slow breath. If you're looking for me to tell you I knew that it would work, I can't do that, sir. Nobody could have known. I just decided that trying and possibly failing was better than doing nothing and definitely failing. Voss looked at her for a long moment, and Claire could not read what was behind his eyes, and that was rare enough that it unsettled her more than any amount of shouting would have. There's something you should know, Chief, he said finally, and he slid a document across the table toward her. Before you say anything else. Claire looked down at the paper. It was a photograph printed in color of the aftermath in that compound, and there laid out among the recovered materials was a hard drive tagged and bagged as evidence. When your team pulled Dr. Caldwell out, Voss said they also pulled that. The encrypted research files that Malenkov had spent 3 days trying to force out of him. We recovered them intact. Do you understand what that means? No, sir, I wasn't briefed on the contents. Neither was Reynolds. Neither was almost anyone. That's how sensitive it was. Voss's flat eyes stayed on her. Dr. Caldwell's research concerns a defensive system. I won't tell you more than that, and you don't want to know more than that. But I'll tell you this much. If Malenkov had broken him, and he was hours away from breaking him, that research would have gone on the open market by the end of the week. It would have ended up in the hands of at least 3 foreign governments who have spent years trying to get it. And the strategic damage to this country would have been measured in decades. He tapped the photograph. You didn't just save a man's life, Chief. You have no idea what you actually stopped. Neither did the general who ordered the abort. He was weighing one civilian life against operational risk. He didn't know he was actually weighing one civilian life against a national security catastrophe because that information was above his pay grade too. Claire stared at the photograph, and for the first time since she had walked into that room, she felt something crack in her composure. I didn't know, she said quietly. No, you didn't. And here's the part that should keep all of us awake at night. Voss's voice dropped. You made the right call for reasons that had nothing to do with the reasons it was actually the right call. You disobeyed that order to save one man because you couldn't stand to watch him die. And in doing so, you accidentally prevented one of the worst intelligence disasters this country would have faced in a generation. The instinct that made you pull that trigger against orders is the exact same instinct that we as an institution spend enormous effort trying to train out of operators because 99 times out of 100, it gets people killed. He leaned back. You are the 1 time in 100, Chief, and that is precisely what makes you such a problem for the people sitting at this table. The room went silent again, and this time the silence had a different quality to it, heavier, more complicated. May I speak freely, sir? Claire asked. You've been speaking freely since you walked in. I don't see why you'd stop now. I'm not asking you to reward me. I want that on the record. I didn't take that shot for a medal, and I don't want one, and if you offered me one, I'd have a hard time accepting it because accepting it would mean pretending the decision was simple, and it wasn't. She met his eyes. But I'm also not going to stand here and apologize for it, sir, because I'm not sorry. I know that's not what you're supposed to say in a room like this. I know I'm supposed to express regret and remorse and a deep respect for the chain of command, and I do respect the chain of command more than you probably believe. But I will not stand here and tell you I regret saving that man's life, because it would be a lie. And I think you'd rather hear the truth from me than a lie that makes this easier for everyone. Voss studied her for a very long time. You're right, he said at last. I would. He closed the folder in front of him, and he folded his hands on top of it, and something in his posture changed, some formality falling away. Let me tell you what happens now, Chief, and I'm going to tell it to you straight because I think you've earned that much. There are people in this building who want to make an example of you. Not because they think you were wrong on that night, but because they're afraid of what it means if word gets around that an operator can override a direct order and be celebrated for it. They're afraid of the next operator, the one who isn't as good as you, who disobeys an order because he thinks he's the exception and gets his whole team killed. That fear is not stupid. It's the reason the rule exists. And every one of them is looking at your case and seeing a precedent they don't want to set. He paused. Do you follow me? Yes, sir. On the other hand, he tapped the folder. There are also people in this building, and I'll admit I'm now one of them, who understand that if we punish you, we're punishing the single finest piece of shooting and the single clearest piece of judgment any of us has seen in our careers. We'd be telling every operator we have that if they're ever faced with a choice between a rule and a life, they'd better choose the rule even when the rule is wrong. And that's a message this institution cannot afford to send either. He shook his head slowly. So you've put us in an impossible position, Chief. You've done something that we can neither punish nor reward without doing damage to the very thing we're trying to protect. You've handed us a paradox with a rifle. Claire almost smiled and caught herself. That wasn't my intention, sir. I know it wasn't. That's what makes it worse. Voss actually let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. If you'd done it for glory, we could crucify you clean. But you did it for the most defensible reason a soldier can have, and you did it perfectly. And now we have to figure out what to do with someone who broke the most important rule we have and was completely undeniably right to do it. He was quiet for a moment, and then he asked her a question that none of them had asked yet, and it was not a question she had prepared for. Chief Morgan, all your career you've had people doubt whether you belonged. I've read your file. I know the road you walked to get here, the instructors who bet against you, the operators who wouldn't work with you at first. The whispers. He watched her carefully. When you were lying on that mountain and you made the choice to disobey, was any part of that about proving them wrong? Be honest with me, because if it was, this conversation goes a different way. And Claire understood that this was the real test. Not the tactics, not the ballistics, not even the chain of command. This, whether she had pulled that trigger for the man on his knees or for her own pride. No, sir, she said, and she said it slowly because she wanted him to know she was actually looking at the question and not just reciting the answer he wanted. I thought about them for exactly 1 second right before I fired. Every voice that ever said I didn't belong. It came up the way old things come up. And then I let it go because it didn't belong in that moment. If I'd fired that shot to prove something to those people, I'd have been thinking about myself, and you cannot make a shot like that while you're thinking about yourself. There's no room. The wind and the math and the target take up all the space there is. The second I let my own ego into that scope, I miss, and Caldwell dies. She held his gaze. I didn't do it for them, sir. I forgot they ever existed. I did it for the man who had children waiting for him. That's the only thing that was in my head when I broke the trigger. His kids, not my critics. His kids. For a long, long moment, Rear Admiral Harlan Voss said nothing at all. And then slowly he nodded, and Claire understood that she had passed a test she hadn't fully known she was taking. There's one more person who wants to be heard on this matter before we adjourn, Voss said, and he glanced toward the door. Ordinarily, I wouldn't allow it. A review of this kind is a closed matter. But given the circumstances, I've made an exception because I think this board needs to hear from him more than it needs to follow procedure. He nodded to the officer nearest the door. Bring him in. The door opened, and Nathan Caldwell walked into the room. Claire had not seen him since the helicopter. He looked different now, cleaned up, rested, wearing a suit instead of a blanket. But his eyes found her instantly, and when they did, something in his face went soft and fierce at the same time. He was not supposed to be here. She could see on the faces of the officers that his presence was unusual, that strings had been pulled, that a man of considerable importance had insisted on something and been granted it because of who he was and what he carried in his head. Gentlemen, Caldwell said, and his voice was steady, but Claire could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes. I understand this is irregular. I understand I don't have a place in your chain of command and no right to tell any of you how to do your jobs. So I'm not going to tell you how to do your jobs. I'm just going to tell you what happened to me, and then I'll leave, and you can do whatever you think is right. He did not sit down. He stood at the end of the table and he looked at the four officers, and then he looked at Claire and he kept looking at her while he spoke. 9 days ago, I was on my knees in the dirt with a gun against the back of my head, and I was saying my children's names out loud because I was certain those were the last words I would ever say. I have a daughter, she's 11. I have a son, he's 14. And in that last moment, I wasn't thinking about my research or my country or any of the things you might expect a man in my position to think about. I was thinking that my son had a soccer game that weekend that I'd promised to be at, and I was going to break that promise, and he was going to grow up thinking his father broke his last promise to him. His voice cracked, and he did not try to hide it. That's what was in my head, a soccer game. That's the size of what I was about to lose, gentlemen. Not something grand, just the ordinary, unglamorous, irreplaceable business of getting to be there for my kids. Nobody in the room moved, and then the man behind me fell down dead. Caldwell continued, and I didn't understand why, and I kept waiting to die, and I didn't die. And every few seconds, another one of them would come to finish the bomb, and every few seconds, one of them would just fall, and I didn't understand that either. It was only later that they told me. There was a woman on a mountain 2.5 kilometers away. She had been ordered to leave me. She'd been told the shot was impossible. She'd been told to stand down and walk away and let me die. And she looked through her scope at a man she had never met, and she decided that I was going to see my son's soccer game. He turned fully toward Claire now. I owe you a debt I can never repay. I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to hug my kids, and they're going to complain that I'm hugging them too hard and too long, and they're never going to know how close they came to not having a father, because the whole thing is going to disappear into one of your classified files. And I've made my peace with that, but I could not in good conscience let you sit in this room and decide her future without at least hearing from the one person in the world who was alive because of what she did. He straightened up and his voice hardened. I've spent my life around risk assessment. It's most of what I do. I understand exactly what she was weighing. I understand that she took a shot that if it had gone even slightly wrong, would have killed me. I've heard people say that makes what she did reckless. He shook his head slowly. But I want to say this as plainly as I can. From where I was kneeling, gentlemen, there was no reckless option and safe option. There was a certain death and a possible one. Your rule protected me from the possible one. She was the only person in the entire chain willing to give me the possible one instead of the certain one, and I am standing here breathing because she did. He looked around the table. So do what you have to do. Follow your rules. Keep your discipline. I understand why it matters. But if any part of your decision involves the question of whether it was worth it, whether the outcome justified the choice, then I would like my continued existence entered into the record as evidence. That's all. That's all I came to say. The room was silent for a long time after he finished, and then Rear Admiral Voss, who had never in 30 years bent a rule for anyone, looked down at the folder in front of him, and then up at the scientist standing at the end of his table, and then over at the sniper standing at attention against the wall, and something moved across his hard, flat face that Claire had not seen there before, something that looked almost like the beginning of a decision he had not expected to make. Thank you, Dr. Caldwell, he said quietly. You may go. What you've said will be part of the record. You have my word on that. Caldwell nodded. He looked at Claire one more time, and again he pressed his hand flat against his chest over his heart, the way he had in the helicopter, and he held it there, and then he turned and walked out of the room, and the door closed behind him. Voss sat in silence for a moment. Then he looked at Claire, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. Chief Morgan, he said, this board is going to adjourn to deliberate. When we reconvene, I'm going to have a decision for you, and I'm not going to lie to you. I don't yet know what it's going to be. But I'll tell you one thing so you don't have to sit out there in the hall inventing horrors for yourself. He held her eyes. Whatever we decide, it is not going to be a simple punishment, and it is not going to be a simple reward. Because what you did was not simple. It was the hardest kind of right there is, the kind that breaks the rules that exist for good reasons. And people like us are going to be arguing about what to do with people like you for as long as there are wars and there are rules and there are human beings caught in the space between them. He stood, and the other 3 officers stood with him, and Claire came to attention. You're dismissed to the outer room, Voss said. We'll call you back in when we've decided. She saluted. They returned it, and then they filed out through a second door, leaving her alone in the windowless room with a photograph of a hard drive and the echo of a scientist's voice. and the enormous uncertain weight of a decision being made about her life in a room she could not see. She walked out into the hall and she sat down on a hard bench and she folded her hands in her lap and she waited. And for the first time since the Mountain Chief Petty Officer Claire Morgan let herself feel afraid, not of dying, not of failing, but of the far quieter terror of sitting still while someone else decided whether the most important thing she had ever done would be remembered as courage or as a crime. They kept her waiting for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and Claire Morgan spent every one of those minutes on that hard bench, hands folded back straight, staring at a blank wall, and refusing to let herself imagine either the best outcome or the worst. She had learned that trick a long time ago. On the mountain, you did not think about the shot before it was time. You did not think about the miss. You emptied your mind of everything except the next thing you could actually control. And right now, the only thing Claire could control was the way she sat on that bench. So she controlled it and she waited. Daniel Brooks found her there about an hour in. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, and she knew them the way she knew everything about him after 3 years of lying next to him in the cold. He sat down on the bench beside her without a word, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. "You're not supposed to be here," she said finally. "No," Daniel agreed. "I'm really not. They could add you to the pile for associating with the woman who ignored a direct order. Let them." He leaned back against the wall. "Claire, I called the wind. I gave you the corrections. I could have refused. I could have said no. That's a direct order. I won't spot for you. And I didn't. I chose to help you make that shot, both of them. And if they want to come after somebody, they can come after me too, because I'm not going to sit in some other room pretending I wasn't right there beside you the whole time." Claire turned and looked at him, and she felt something tighten in her chest. "Daniel, don't do the thing where you try to take all of it onto yourself. That's your whole problem. You know that you carry everything alone. You've carried it your whole career because you had to, because nobody would help you carry it, because half the people around you were waiting for you to drop it." He shook his head. "But I was up there. I chose. It was my decision too, and I'd make it again." She looked away because, if she kept looking at him, she was going to lose the last thin thread of composure she had left, and she could not afford that, not with the door about to open, not with the rest of her life about to be decided by people on the other side of it. "They brought Caldwell in," she said instead. "Into the review," he testified. Daniel's eyebrows went up. "They let a civilian into a closed board. Voss made an exception. Caldwell insisted. He stood there and he told them about his kids. His son has a soccer game." Her voice caught just slightly, and she cleared it. "He told a room full of admirals that his son has a soccer game and that he almost missed it forever and that I'm the reason he won't. And then he put his hand on his heart and he walked out." She swallowed. "I've saved a lot of people, Daniel, from a distance. I never had to look at any of them. I never had to hear about the soccer games." "It's different when you hear about the soccer games." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "That's the part they can't put in a file," he said. "The soccer game. They can classify the operation. They can bury the location. They can redact every name, including yours. But somewhere out there tonight, there's going to be a kid at a soccer game with his dad in the stands. And that dad is going to be alive because of a shot that officially never happened, made by a woman who officially wasn't there." He looked at her. "That's real, Claire. That happened. No matter what they decide in that room, that already happened, and nobody can undo it." Before she could answer, the door opened. An aide stepped out. "Chief Petty Officer Morgan, the board is ready for you." Claire stood. Daniel stood with her, and for a second the two of them just looked at each other, spotter and shooter, the way they had looked at each other in the half second before she fired. "Whatever's on the other side of that door," Daniel said quietly, "you already did the right thing. That part's finished. This part is just paperwork." She almost smiled. "Since when are you the calm one? Since you used all the calm up on the mountain and left none for yourself." He touched her shoulder briefly. "Go on. I'll be right here." She walked back into the windowless room. The 4 officers were already seated. Voss was in the center, the folder closed in front of him, his pale eyes unreadable. Claire came to attention and held it, and the room was so quiet she could hear the faint hum of the lights overhead. "Chief Morgan," Voss said. "Be seated." She sat. Voss opened to the folder. He looked at it for a moment, and then he closed it again. And Claire understood that whatever he was about to say, he had already decided it, and he did not need the paper to say it. "This board has deliberated," he began, And I'm going to tell you first what we agreed on because it's important that you understand it. We agreed unanimously that you disobeyed a direct and lawful order. That is not in dispute, it never was. You confessed to it freely and the recordings confirm it. Under the letter of military law, that is a serious offense, and it carries serious consequences up to and including the end of your career and worse. He paused. I want you to sit with that for a second so you understand the ground we were standing on. By the book, Chief, we would have been entirely within our rights to end you here today, to strip your rank, to end your service, to make you the cautionary tale that every young operator hears about for the next 20 years. That was on the table. It was a real option. I want you to know that. Claire held very still. Yes, sir. But Voss leaned forward slightly. There's a difference between the letter of the law and the purpose of the law. And a board that only ever looks at the letter is not a board of leaders. It's a machine. And we are not machines, however much some people in this building might prefer it if we were. He folded his hands. So we didn't just ask ourselves whether you broke the rule. We asked ourselves what the rule is for. And the rule against disobeying orders exists for one reason above all others, Chief. It exists to prevent chaos. It exists so that an operator's individual judgment, which is limited, which is emotional, which can be wrong, does not override the broader judgment of a command that can see the whole picture. He tilted his head. Now here is the thing that kept this board arguing for the better part of 3 hours. In your case, that logic runs backward. In your case, it was the command that had the limited picture. It was the command that could not see the shot. And it was your individual judgment, the very thing the rule is designed to suppress, that turned out to have the complete picture. The rule was written to stop exactly the kind of decision you made. And the rule in this one instance was wrong. Claire said nothing. She did not trust herself to speak. So we could not in good conscience punish you as though you had endangered the mission, Voss continued. Because you didn't endanger the mission. You saved it. The command endangered the mission with the best of intentions and the best available information, and you rescued it from the mistake. To punish you for that would be to punish you for being right when your superiors were wrong, and there is no version of that which strengthens this institution. It only teaches our best people to stop thinking. He paused. But, and this is the part I need you to hear most carefully, Chief, because it's the part that matters. We also cannot reward you. We cannot celebrate you. We cannot make you a hero, because the moment we do that, we send a message to every operator in every unit that disobeying an order is not just permitted, but praised, and the next person who tries what you tried will not be you. He will not have your skill or your judgment or your reasons. He will be some hotshot who thinks he's the exception, and he will get his whole team killed, reaching for a shot he had no business taking. And when we go to hold him accountable, he will point at you. He will say, but you gave her a medal for the exact same thing. And we will have no answer for him. Voss let that hang in the air. Do you understand the trap you put us in, Chief? Do you see it now? We cannot punish you because you were right. And we cannot honor you because honoring you would license every wrong version of what you did. You have forced this board to find a third path, and I'll be honest with you, there is no good third path. There is only the least bad one. Claire's heart was beating hard now, but her voice came out steady. I understand, sir, and for what it's worth, I never wanted the medal. I told you that. I meant it. I know you did. That's part of why we trust you with what we're about to do. Voss opened the folder one last time. Here is the decision of this board. Officially on paper in the record that exists for the review of your conduct, you will receive a formal letter of reprimand for disobeying a direct order. It will go in your file. It will state in dry and bloodless language that you engaged a target contrary to command instruction. That is the version of this that exists in the light where the wrong people might see it, and it will do exactly what a reprimand is supposed to do. It will say plainly that we do not endorse disobeying orders. It protects the rule. Claire absorbed that, a reprimand, a permanent mark. She had expected it, but hearing it still landed like a weight. However, Voss said, and his voice changed, there is a second record, a classified one that will never see the light of day, that will be read only by people with the clearance to understand what actually happened that night. And in that record, this board has entered a full and unambiguous account of your conduct. It states that the abort order was issued based on incomplete information. It states that your assessment of the shot was correct where the commands was not. It states that your actions directly prevented the loss of the hostage and, more importantly, prevented a compromise of classified research that would have caused catastrophic and lasting damage to national security. And it states in the plainest terms this board could find that Chief Petty Officer Claire Morgan performed under impossible circumstances at a level that this board considers without equal in its collective experience. He looked up at her. That record will follow you too, Chief, quietly. In the places that matter among the people who decide the paths of careers like yours, it will be known exactly what you did and exactly how well you did it. You will not be celebrated in public, but you will not be forgotten in private. Do you understand the difference? Yes, sir, Claire said quietly. One record for the rule, one record for the truth. One record for the rule, one record for the truth. Voss nodded slowly. That is the least bad path. It's not justice exactly. Justice would be a parade, and you can't have a parade. But it's the closest thing to justice that an institution like this one it is capable of giving to someone like you. The reprimand protects the discipline that keeps everyone alive. The classified record protects you from being buried by that same discipline. And between the two of them, we've done the only honest thing available to us, which is to tell two true stories about the same night and let each of them do the work it needs to do. Claire sat with that for a long moment. She had walked into that room prepared to lose everything. She had made her peace with it on the mountain, and what she was being handed instead was not vindication, not glory, but something stranger and quieter, and she slowly realized more honest than either. She would carry a mark that said she had done wrong, and a secret that said she had done right, and she would carry them both at the same time for the rest of her life, and that was somehow exactly the shape of what she had actually done. May I ask a question, sir? You've earned that much. The reprimand, when people see it in my file in the years to come, the ones who don't have the clearance for the other record, they're going to think I'm the operator who couldn't follow orders. They're going to wonder if I can be trusted. It's going to close doors for me. She kept her voice level because she was not complaining, she was simply naming the truth of it. I accept that. I'm not asking you to change it. I just want to understand it clearly so I can carry it right. And for the first time, Rear Admiral Harlan Voss's hard face softened into something almost like respect. Yes, Chief, he said. It will close some doors. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. There will be people who look at that reprimand and never bother to ask what's behind it, and they'll make their judgments, and some of those judgments will cost you. That's the price of the path we've chosen. You'll pay part of the bill for protecting the rule, even though you're the one who was right. He paused. But I'll tell you something and then we're done here. The doors that reprimand closes are doors that lead to people who judge a career by a single line in a file. And you don't want to walk through those doors anyway. The people worth working for, the ones who will actually shape what's left of your service, those people have the clearance to read the other record, and they will seek you out precisely because of what it says. You won't lose the doors that matter, Chief. You'll only lose the ones that were never going to be good enough for you in the first place. Claire felt something loosen in her chest that had been clenched tight for 9 days. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. I gave you a reprimand. But there was something almost warm in the way he said it now. There's one more thing, and then you're free to go. It's not part of the official proceedings. It's just something I want to say to you from one sailor to another. He set the folder aside entirely. In 30 years, Chief, I have sat on a lot of boards like this one. I have watched a lot of people try to explain away the things they did. Everybody who comes into this room wants something. They want to keep their rank, or their pension, or their reputation, or their freedom. They come in here angling, calculating, telling us the version of the story that helps them most. And I've gotten very good at seeing through it. He looked at her steadily. You walked in here and confessed before we asked you a single question. You refused a medal you could have easily accepted. You told me you weren't sorry in a room full of people who could end your life because you'd rather tell the truth than say the thing that would help you. In 30 years, Chief, I have almost never seen that. You wanted nothing from us except the chance to be honest about what you did. And that, more than the shot, more than the outcome, is why this board found the least bad path instead of the easy one. Not because of what you did on the mountain, because of who you turned out to be in this room. Claire's throat was tight. She managed to hold her voice steady. Permission to speak freely one last time, sir. Granted. I didn't do any of it alone. She looked him in the eye. My spotter Daniel Brooks called every correction on both of those shots. I don't make either one without him. He could have refused to help. He knew what it meant. He chose to help anyway, and he's sitting on a bench in your hallway right now, ready to take whatever's coming to me because he doesn't think I should carry it by myself. She held Voss's gaze. Whatever's in that classified record, sir, his name belongs next to mine. I won't take the private honor if he doesn't. He earned it exactly as much as I did. Please put that in the record, too. Voss looked at her for a long moment, and then he glanced at the officer to his left, who gave a small nod and began to write. It's done, Voss said. Petty Officer Brooks will be named in the classified account alongside you with a full statement of his role. You have my word. Something flickered across his face. You know, Chief, most people in your position spend their last moment in this room trying to save themselves. You spent yours trying to save the man in the hallway. I don't think you understand how rare that is. Or maybe you do, and that's exactly why you did it. He stood, and the board stood with him, and Claire came to her feet one final time. Chief Petty Officer Morgan, Voss said formally, this board is adjourned. You are dismissed to return to your unit. Your reprimand will be entered. Your classified commendation will be entered. And on a personal note which has no rank and no record and means nothing officially at all. He paused, and then he did something Claire had not expected, something no one in that room had expected. He came to attention, and he raised his hand, and he saluted her. It was the finest thing I've seen in 30 years. Thank you for your service, Chief. The other 3 officers came to attention and saluted with him. And Claire Morgan, standing alone at the end of a long table in a windowless room, deep inside the Pentagon, with a reprimand in her file and a secret in the vault, and the salute of 4 senior officers held on her, understood that she had walked into that room expecting to lose everything and was walking out having lost almost nothing that mattered and having kept the one thing she had come in determined to protect, which was the simple, unbendable truth of why she had pulled the trigger. She returned the salute, she held it, and then she turned and walked out of the room. Daniel was on his feet the moment the door opened, reading her face the way he read everything fast and close and certain, and whatever he saw there made his shoulders drop half an inch in relief. Well, he said. Reprimand in the file, she said, for the rule. His face fell. And a classified commendation in the vault, she went on. For the truth, both of ours. I made them put your name next to mine, Daniel. You called the wind. You're in the real record now, right beside me where you belong. Daniel stared at her. You did what? You said it yourself. It was your decision too, so it's your record too. She almost smiled. I wasn't going to let you carry the risk and skip the credit. That's not how it works. Not with us. For a moment, Daniel Brooks could not say anything at all. And then he let out a long breath and shook his head and looked at her with something in his eyes that went past 3 years of lying in the cold together. You know, he said, you spent your whole career with people telling you that you carry everything alone. Maybe you finally proved them wrong. You just spent your one shot at private glory making sure I got half of it. He swallowed. Come on, let's get out of this building. I've had enough windowless rooms for one lifetime. They walked out of the Pentagon together into the ordinary afternoon, and the world outside had no idea what had happened in that room, or on that mountain, or in the space of a single held breath 2.5 kilometers above a dying man. The world would never know. But Claire Morgan knew, and Daniel knew, and somewhere out there a scientist was going home to a son with a soccer game carrying a secret of his own, pressing his hand to his heart every time he thought about the woman on the mountain who had refused to let him die. And that Claire understood as she stepped out into the sunlight was going to have to be enough. Not the parade, not the headlines, just the quiet, unshakable knowledge of what she had done and why, and the one person walking beside her who had chosen to do it with her. It was more than enough. It was everything. Claire and Daniel did not go far. They found a bench outside the building in a quiet corner where the foot traffic thinned out, and they sat down together the way they had sat on the bench in the hallway, except now the weight was off them and the afternoon light was warm, and for a while neither of them felt any need to fill the silence with words. Can I ask you something? Daniel said eventually. You're going to anyway. In there, when Voss gave you the chance. You could have fought harder. You could have argued the reprimand off entirely. You had Caldwell in your corner. You had the classified record backing you. You had 4 officers who clearly respected the hell out of you. If you'd pushed, I think they might have found a way to give you a clean file. He looked at her. Why didn't you fight it? Claire was quiet for a moment, watching a group of young sailors cross the plaza in the distance, their whole careers still ahead of them. Because Voss was right, she said finally. About the next guy. There's always a next guy, Daniel. Some kid 3 years from now, lying behind a rifle wanting to be the hero, wanting to be me. And he's going to come to a moment where a command tells him to hold, and he's going to think about disobeying. And in that half second, the thing that stops him is going to be the knowledge that if he's wrong, there are consequences. That the rule has teeth. She turned to him. If I'd walked out of there with a clean file, I'd have pulled those teeth. I'd have made it look like disobeying an order is free as long as you get lucky. And some kid would get his whole team killed believing that. The reprimand isn't a punishment for me. It's a warning for him. And I'm okay carrying that. I'd rather carry a reprimand than have a dead team on my conscience because I wanted my record to look pretty. Daniel shook his head slowly. You think about this stuff too much. Somebody has to. I had a lot of time on that bench. No, I mean it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Most people, they'd take the clean file. They'd take it and never look back and never spend 1 second worrying about some hypothetical kid 3 years down the line. But you sat in that room and you turned down the thing that would help you because you were thinking about a soldier who doesn't even exist yet. He shook his head again. That's the thing nobody understood about you. All those people who bet against you who said you didn't belong. They thought you were up on that mountain thinking about yourself, proving something, and the whole time you were the only one in the building thinking about everybody else. Claire didn't answer that. She didn't know how to. Praise had always made her uncomfortable in a way that criticism never had. Criticism she could stand still under the way she stood still under the wind. Praise she never knew what to do with. Can I tell you something I never told you? Daniel said. That sounds ominous. When they first assigned me to spot for you 3 years ago, he grimaced slightly. I didn't want it. I put in for a transfer. I thought I was getting stuck with a diversity checkbox. Somebody they'd push through the pipeline to look good in a press release. I figured I'd be spotting for someone who'd fold the first time things got real and I'd end up dead because of it. He let that sit for a second. I never told you that. I'm not proud of it, but I want you to know it because I want you to know what it means that I'm the one who called the wind on that mountain. Claire looked at him. Why are you telling me this now? Because you spent 3 years earning your way past every assumption I walked in with, and I never once said thank you for it. And then in that hallway, you put my name in the classified record when you didn't have to, when nobody would ever have known I was even there. You made sure I got carried too. His voice roughened. The guy who tried to transfer away from you 3 years ago, that's who you fought to get credit for. So yeah, I'm telling you now because you deserve to hear it, and I've been a coward about saying it for 3 years, and I'm done being a coward about it. For a long moment, Claire said nothing. Then she reached over and put her hand on his shoulder the way he had put his on hers in the hallway. You called the wind perfectly, she said quietly. Both shots. If you'd been even a little bit off, Caldwell dies and I go to prison, and neither of us ever comes home. I don't make those shots without you, Daniel. I've been telling everybody that for 9 days, and I meant it every single time. So whatever you walked in believing 3 years ago, it doesn't matter. What matters is that when the moment came, you didn't hesitate. You could have refused. You could have hidden behind the order. You chose to jump off the cliff with me instead. That's who you turned out to be when it counted. That's the only version of you I care about. Daniel had to look away for a second. When he looked back, his eyes were wet, and he didn't bother to hide it. We're a hell of a pair, he said. The woman nobody thought belonged, and the guy who tried to transfer away from her. And we pulled off the 2 impossible shots and saved the whole mission and stopped an intelligence disaster, and the world's never going to know any of it. No, Claire agreed. They're not. Does that bother you? Really be honest. Claire thought about it. She thought about it the way she thought about everything, carefully turning it over, refusing to give the easy answer just because it was expected. It did at first, she admitted. Not the fame, I never wanted fame, but there's a part of you that wants somebody to know. That wants the record to say this happened, this was real, this mattered. And to know that the official version is going to be a reprimand and a redacted file, that the true version lives in a vault that almost nobody will ever open. She shook her head slowly. For about a day that ate at me, and then Caldwell walked into that review, and he stood there and talked about his son's soccer game, and I realized something.
What?
The record I actually care about isn't in any vault. It's in a 14-year-old kid who's going to have his dad at his games for the rest of his childhood. It's in an 11-year-old girl who's going to get walked down the aisle someday by a father who was supposed to die on his knees in the dirt. That's the record, Daniel. That's where it's written. Not on paper. In the lives of people who will never know my name, but who got to keep somebody they love because of one breath on a mountain. She let out a slow breath. You can't classify that. You can't redact it. It just goes on and on quietly in a family that has no idea for the rest of their lives. That's a bigger record than any medal. I just had to figure out how to read it. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, and then he let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You know, most snipers I've worked with, you ask them about a shot, they tell you about windage and holdover and muzzle velocity. I ask you about the most impossible shot in the history of the job, and you tell me about a kid's soccer game. You asked the wrong question then. A small smile touched the corner of her mouth. The windage and the holdover, that's just the tool. The soccer game is the reason. If you only ever think about the tool, you'll be a good shooter, but you'll never understand why you're up there in the first place. My father taught me that before he taught me anything about a rifle. He said the shot is never about the target. It's about the reason. And the reason is always somebody's soccer game. It's always somebody's family. It's always somebody who gets to go home because you were willing to be still when everything was falling apart. Daniel was quiet for a while after that. The plaza had emptied out around them, the afternoon sliding toward evening, and the two of them sat there in the fading light with the enormous invisible weight of what they'd done settling into something they could finally carry without it crushing them. Your father, Daniel said eventually, is he still around? He passed 4 years ago, just before I got selected for the unit. Claire's voice stayed steady, but something moved beneath it. He never got to see me make it. He spent my whole childhood teaching me to shoot, teaching me to be still, teaching me that being calm when the world's on fire is the rarest and most important thing a person can learn. And then he died right before it all paid off. She looked down at her hands. There were moments on that mountain in the call when I could hear his voice, right before I fired, clear as if he was lying next to me. The shot is never about the target, Claire. The shot is about you. Can you be still? And I was, for him a little bit, but mostly for Caldwell. She swallowed. I like to think he'd have understood the reprimand. I think he'd have been prouder of the reprimand than he would have been of a medal, honestly. Because the reprimand means I broke a rule to save a life, and that's exactly the kind of person he raised me to be. The kind who does the right thing even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. Daniel didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. He just sat with her in the quiet, letting the weight of it be what it was. He'd be proud of you, he said finally. Reprimand and all, maybe especially the reprimand. Yeah, Claire's voice was soft. Yeah, I think he would. After a while, Daniel stood and stretched and offered her his hand to pull her up off the bench. Come on, he said, it's over. The mountain's over, the review's over, the waiting's over. Whatever happens next, we walk into it clean. Claire took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. And for a moment, the two of them stood there, in the last of the light, two people who had shared the coldest, longest, most impossible night of their lives and had come out the other side with a reprimand, a secret and something between them that no file could ever capture and no vault could ever hold. You ever think about what happens now? Daniel asked. The doors Voss said would close. Some of them will close, Claire said. He told me the truth about that. There'll be people who see the reprimand and never ask what's behind it. Careers I won't get, assignments I won't be offered. That's real. She started walking and Daniel fell in beside her. But Voss said something else too. He said the doors that reprimand closes are doors that lead to people who judge you by one line in a file. And I've been judged by one line my whole life. Woman, diversity hire, doesn't belong. I've spent my entire career walking past those doors already. Losing a few more of them isn't going to change how I live. And the doors that matter, the people who matter have the clearance to read the real record. And they'll come find me. Voss said that too. She glanced at him. I've never once in my life gotten anywhere by having doors open for me, Daniel. I got here by refusing to accept the ones that were closed. This is just more of the same. I know how to do this. I've been doing it since I was the only girl on the range with a father who wouldn't let me quit. They walked toward this parking lot as the streetlights began to flicker on around them. For what it's worth, Daniel said, I'd spot for you again. Any day, any distance, any shot they say is impossible. I'd call the win for you every single time. Claire smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. I know you would, she said. That's the whole reason it worked. A shot like that at that distance in that cold with everything on the line. It's never one person no matter what the stories say. It's two people who trust each other so completely that they can share one breath and one heartbeat across 2.5 kilometers of freezing air. She looked at him. The world's always going to want to make it about one hero on a mountain. But you and I know the truth. It was two of us up there. It was always two of us. And that's the part I'll never let anybody forget, no matter how classified they make it. They reached the edge of the lot and stopped, and for a moment just stood there, not quite ready to go their separate ways, because going their separate ways meant it was really over the whole strange, terrible, extraordinary chapter of it. Hey, Claire, Daniel said. Yeah, that kid 3 years from now. The one you took the reprimand for. The one you're worried about. He paused. If he ever does end up behind a rifle staring down an impossible shot, wondering whether to break the rule. I hope he's half as good as you, and I hope he's got a spotter who trusts him the way I trust you, because that's the only way anybody survives a moment like the one we had. Claire looked at him for a long moment. He won't be me, she said quietly, and that's exactly why the reprimand has to exist. So he stops and thinks before he pulls that trigger. So he asks himself whether he's really the one who can see the shot or whether he just wants to be. She reached out and gripped his shoulder one last time. But if he does stop and think, and he decides he's really the only one who can save that life, and he takes the shot and he's right, a ghost of a smile, then I hope somebody in a windowless room finds the least bad path for him too, the way Voss found it for me. That's all any of us can ask for at the end of it. Not to be celebrated, just to be understood. And with that, Chief Petty Officer Claire Morgan let go of her spotter's shoulder, and the two of them stood in the gathering dark outside the building where her fate had been decided, carrying between them a reprimand no one would question and a truth no one would ever read, and the quiet, unbreakable bond of two people who had done the impossible together and asked for nothing in return except the right to be honest about why they did it. The letter arrived 8 months later, and it changed everything Claire Morgan thought she understood about the night on the mountain. She had settled into a quieter life by then, or what passed for quiet in her line of work. The reprimand had done exactly what Voss said it would. There were assignments she was not offered. There were rooms she walked into where she felt the temperature drop 0.5 degree. There were officers who looked at the line in her file and decided they knew everything they needed to know about her and never once asked what was behind it. She had made her peace with all of it. She had been walking past closed doors her whole life. A few more did not break her. But there had also been in the other thing, the thing Voss had promised. Quiet phone calls from people whose names she recognized. Careful conversations that never quite mentioned the mountain, but circled it close enough that she understood the person on the other end had read the real record. Doors she had never expected opening in the dark, held by people who knew exactly what she had done and exactly how well she had done it. Voss had told her the truth. The people worth working for had found her, and they had found her precisely because of the night the official record called a mistake. So when the envelope came hand-delivered, unmarked, with no return address, she almost did not open it right away. She had learned to be careful with things that arrived without names on them. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The letter was not from the military. It was not from Voss or Reynolds or anyone in her chain of command. It was handwritten in a careful, slightly uneven hand, and it took her a moment to understand who it was from, because the man had been careful, too careful not to name anything that would compromise anyone, careful to write around the classified edges of the thing they shared. It was from Nathan Caldwell. He wrote that he was not supposed to contact her. He knew that. He said he had thought about the rules for a long time, and he had decided that some things were more important than rules, and that he suspected she of all people would understand that given how they had met. He said he would not mention anything he was not supposed to mention. He said he just needed to tell her one thing, and then he would never write again, and she could burn the letter and no one would ever know. He wrote that his son had made the varsity team. He wrote that he had been at every single game, that he had stood in the stands in the cold, in the rain and the wind, week after week, and cheered until his voice gave out, and that every single time without fail, there was a moment in the game when he would look up at the sky above the field, at the empty air beyond the lights, and he would think about her. He would think about a woman he had met once for a few minutes at the worst and best moment of his life. A woman on a mountain he never saw who had refused an order to let him die. He wrote that his daughter had asked him a few weeks ago why he always hugged them so hard, why he held on a beat too long, why sometimes at dinner he would just stop and look at the two of them like he was trying to memorize their faces. He wrote that he had not been able to answer her, that he had just held her tighter and told her he loved her and left it at that. Because how do you tell a child that you almost weren't there, that you were on your knees in the dirt saying her name because you thought it was the last time you'd ever get to, that the only reason you're at the dinner table at all is a stranger's single breath on a frozen mountain 2.5 kilometers away? You can't tell a child that he wrote, so I carry it alone. But I wanted one person in the world to know that I carry it. And you're the only one who could possibly understand. At the bottom, he had written, I don't know your name. They never told me. But every game, every dinner, every ordinary, beautiful day I get with my kids that I was never supposed to have, I say a thank you into the air to the woman on the mountain. I hope somehow it reaches you. I hope you know what you gave me. It was not a life. It was every day of a life. And there is no medal in the world big enough for that, so I'm sending you this instead. The photograph was of a soccer field, empty, just green grass and white lines and a goal at the far end taken from the stands. On the back, in that same careful hand, he had written 4 words, "This is the record." Claire Morgan sat with that photograph for a long time. She had told Daniel 8 months ago that the real record was not in any vault, that it was written in the lives of people who would never know her name. She had believed it when she said it, but believing a thing and holding the proof of it in your hands are 2 different weights, and now she was holding the proof in an empty soccer field and 4 words, and she understood that she had been more right than she knew. This was the record, not the reprimand, not the classified commendation locked away where almost no one would ever read it. This, a father in the stands, a kid on the field, an ordinary Saturday that only existed because she had refused to accept the word abort. She did not burn the letter the way he'd suggested she could. She could not bring herself to do it. Instead, she folded it carefully and put it in the one place she kept the things that mattered most, and she kept the photograph of the empty field where she could see it. And from then on the hard days, on the days when the reprimand cost her something, on the days when someone looked at her file and decided they knew who she was, she would look at that empty field and she would remember what the real record said, and it would be enough. It would always be enough. She called Daniel that night. "You'll never guess what came in the mail," she said. "If it's another reprimand, I'm going to be very upset on your behalf." "It's from Caldwell." There was a silence on the line. "He's not supposed to." "I know. He knows too. He did it anyway." Her voice was thick. "Daniel, his kid made varsity. He's been at every game, every single one. And he sent me a picture of a soccer field, and he said, 'This is the record.'" She had to stop for a second. "You remember what I told you outside the building, that the real record isn't in any vault. It's in the lives of the people who'll never know my name." "I remember." "He proved it? He proved I was right. There's an empty soccer field in my hands right now, and it's the biggest commendation I'm ever going to get. And it's got no rank and no stamp, and it'll never go in any file, and it means more than everything that happened in that Pentagon put together." She let out a shaky breath. I just needed to tell somebody, and you were the only one who'd understand. You were up there. You called the win. That field exists because of both of us, Daniel. You should know about the field, too." She heard him breathe out, slow and unsteady on the other end of the line. "Send me a copy of the picture," he said finally, and his voice was rough. "I want to look at it, too. On the hard days. I want to be able to look at what we did." "I will. Claire." A pause. "You know what gets me all that arguing in that windowless room? Voss and the board and the 2 records in the least bad path. Weeks of it. And in the end, the thing that actually matters, the thing that's actually true, fits on the back of a photograph in 4 words. This is the record. That's it. That's the whole thing. Everything else was just people trying to fit something that big into forms that were always going to be too small for it. Yeah, Claire said quietly. That's exactly it. That's exactly what it was. They talked a while longer, the two of them, spotter and shooter, the way they always would, and then they hung up, and Claire sat alone with the empty soccer field and the letter from a man who wasn't supposed to write to her, and she felt for the first time in a long time, completely at peace with everything the mountain had cost her. But the story was not quite finished, because 2 years after that, something happened that Claire Morgan never saw coming, something that closed the whole thing in a way she could never have written herself. She was teaching by then. It had happened the way Voss said it would, quietly through the doors that opened in the dark. Someone with the clearance to read the real record had decided that whatever the reprimand said, the person who made those 2 shots and then walked into a Pentagon review and refused to lie about any of it was exactly the person who should be training the next generation of snipers. So they had brought her in to teach, not the mechanics. Anyone could teach the mechanics. They brought her in to teach the thing that could not be put in a manual, the stillness, the reason, the impossible weight of the moment when a single decision changes everything. And one afternoon at the end of a long day on the range, a young trainee came up to her. A kid really barely 23 with the raw talent she recognized because she'd once had it herself, and the same thing behind his eyes that she'd once had too, the hunger to prove that he belonged somewhere people kept telling him he didn't. "Chief Morgan," he said, "can I ask you something off the record?" "Everything's off the record on my range, son. That's the only way anybody learns anything real." "What is it?" The kid hesitated, and then he said, "There's a story. Nobody talks about it directly, but everybody's heard some version. A shot nobody thought was possible. An order that got ignored. A hostage that got saved when command had already written him off." He looked at her carefully. "The people who tell it, they always say it was 2 shooters. But some of them say one of them was a woman. And the way they look at me when they say it, the way they look at you." He swallowed. "It was you, wasn't it? The story. It was you." Claire looked at the kid for a long moment. She was not supposed to confirm it. The whole thing was classified. The reprimand was the only version that officially existed. She could have deflected. She could have told him stories were just stories. She had spent 2 years saying nothing, keeping the truth in the vault where it belonged. But she looked at this kid, this hungry, talented kid who reminded her so much of herself, and she thought about the things she'd told Daniel outside the Pentagon 2 years before, about the next guy, the one she'd taken the reprimand for, the one who'd someday be behind a rifle staring down an impossible shot, wondering whether to break the rule. And she understood suddenly that maybe this was him. Maybe this kid was the exact one the reprimand had been written to protect. And maybe the most important thing she could ever teach him was not whether the story was true, but what the story actually meant. "Let me tell you something," she said, "and I'm only going to say it once, so listen close. There's a version of that story that people love to tell. The lone hero on the mountain, the impossible shot, the rebel who ignored orders and got proved right. And I'll be honest with you, son, that version is dangerous. That version is going to get somebody killed someday. Because some kid's going to hear it and think that's who I want to be. The one who breaks the rule and becomes a legend." The kid was very still now, listening. "So here's the version I want you to carry instead," Claire went on. "There was a shooter on a mountain who was ordered to stand down. And that order was given by good people with good intentions based on the best information they had. And those good people were wrong because they couldn't see what the shooter could see. And the shooter knew with total certainty that she was the only person alive who could actually see the shot. Not because she was special, because of where she was lying, because of what was in front of her eye. She had the complete picture, and command had the incomplete one, and that, and only that, is what made the difference." She held his gaze. "You understand what I'm telling you? It wasn't about being brave enough to break a rule. Any fool can break a rule. It was about being certain enough and being right enough and being willing to pay for it, whether she was right or wrong. That shooter walked into that review knowing she might lose everything, and she took a reprimand. She didn't fight because she understood that the rule had to keep its teeth. So the next kid, some kid, maybe a lot like you, wouldn't break it for the wrong reasons and kill his whole team. The kid was quiet for a long moment. So it was you, he said softly. I didn't say that, Claire said, and then after a pause, gentler. But I'll tell you this, if it was me, the thing I'd want you to take from it isn't that I made the shot. Lots of people can make a shot with enough training and enough luck. The thing I'd want you to take from it is that I never once thought about myself when I pulled that trigger. Not my record, not my reputation, not proving anybody wrong. There was a man on his knees with kids waiting for him at home, and there was a job to do, and there was a moment to be still in, and that's all there was. The second you let your own ego into that scope, son, the second it becomes about you and what you're going to prove, you've already missed. You just don't know it yet. The kid nodded slowly, and then he asked the question that Claire had been waiting 2 years without knowing it to be asked. How do you live with it if you're wrong? If you take the shot against orders and you're wrong and somebody dies because of you, how do you carry that? And Claire Morgan gave him the truest answer she had. You carry it by making sure you're never taking the shot for yourself, she said. That's the whole thing right there. If you take it for your own glory and you're wrong, it'll destroy you, and it should. But if you take it because you're truly the only one who can save that life, and you've done the math, and you've read the wind, and you know in your bones it's the only chance that person has, and you take it for them and not for you. She paused. Then whether you hit or miss, you did the only thing a good person could do in that moment. And you can live with that. Hitting is better. God hitting is so much better. But even the miss, you can survive the miss if you know your reasons were clean. It's the reasons that let you sleep, son. Not the outcome, the reasons. The kid stood there for a long time absorbing that. And then he straightened, and there was something different in his eyes now, something that had settled and gone quiet. Thank you, Chief, he said. I think I understand now. Not just the shot, the whole thing. Then I did my job, Claire said. Now go clean your rifle and think about your reasons every day. Long before you ever need them, because the moment you need them, there won't be time to figure them out. They have to already be there. The kid walked off toward the armory, and Claire Morgan watched him go, and she understood that this was the record too. Not just the soccer field, this. A young shooter walking away with the right version of the story in his head, the version that might someday keep him and his team alive. This was what the reprimand had been for. This was the next guy, and she had reached him. She had reached him in time. That night, she called Daniel one last time to tell him about it because Daniel was the only one who would understand what it meant. I think I finally get it, she told him. The whole thing, the reprimand, the vault, all of it. I used to think the reprimand was the price I paid for saving Caldwell. But that's not what it was. The reprimand was a gift I gave to a kid I hadn't even met yet. It was the thing that made him stop and think today instead of just wanting to be a legend. If I'd walked out of that Pentagon with a clean file and a medal, that kid walks off my range today thinking the answer is to break the rule and be a hero. Instead, he walked off thinking about his reasons. The reprimand did that, Daniel. The reprimand saved a kid I'll never even know the end of the story for. You really did think about him, Daniel said quietly. The next guy. 2 years ago on that bench, you told me you took the reprimand for him. And here he is. Here he is, Claire agreed. And there's going to be more of them. And every one of them is going to hear some version of the story, and the version they hear matters more than whether they ever learn my name. So I'm going to keep teaching them the right version. The one where it was never about the shot, it was always about the reasons. She was quiet for a moment. You know what I finally figured out, Daniel? All those people my whole career who said I didn't belong, who thought I was up on that mountain to prove something. They had it exactly backwards. The reason I could make that shot is the exact same reason they were wrong about me. I never needed to prove anything to anybody. I've never needed it. That's what let me be still when it mattered. If I'd been the person they thought I was the one with something to prove, I'd have missed, and Caldwell would be dead, and there'd be no soccer field, and no letter, and no kid on my range today. The very thing they held against me, that I didn't fit their picture of a hero, that's the thing that saved his life. Because I was never trying to be a hero. I was just trying to be still and to be right and to bring a man home to his kids. There was a long silence on the line. Claire, Daniel said finally, do you ever wish they knew all of them, the ones who doubted you? Do you ever wish you could show them the soccer field, the letter, the kid, all of it, and watch them realize how wrong they were. By Dennis Alma. And Claire Morgan, who had made the two most impossible shots in the history of her profession, who had walked into a windowless room, prepared to lose everything, and walked out having kept the only thing that mattered, who carried a reprimand in the light, and a truth in the dark, in an empty soccer field, in the place where she kept the things she loved, gave the answer that closed the whole story, the answer that was the sum of everything the mountain had taught her. No, she said, I don't need them to know. That was always their mistake, Daniel, not mine, needing other people to know. I know what I did. Caldwell knows. You know. A kid on my range is going to carry the right version of it for the rest of his life. And somewhere out there, a father is standing in the stands at his son's game, saying thank you into the empty air. That's the record. That's the whole record. And it's written in a place no one can ever reprimand or classify or take away from me. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was absolutely certain, the way it had been in the half second before she fired. I was never the loudest person in the room. I was never going to be. But when everyone else saw an impossible situation and gave up, I saw one more chance, and I took it, and a man went home to his children. That is who I am. That is what I did. And I don't need anyone in the world to know it for it to be true. She hung up the phone. She looked at the empty soccer field on her wall, green grass and white lines, and 4 words on the back that outweighed every medal ever struck. And Chief Petty Officer Claire Morgan, the woman no one thought belonged the sniper the world would never know, understood with perfect and final clarity that the hardest battle she had ever fought was never against an enemy and never against the impossible distance and never even against the order to stand down. It was against the voice that said her worth depended on being seen. And on a frozen mountain in the space of a single held breath, with a man's whole life resting on one calculation, she had defeated that voice forever. She had done the impossible for no reward, taken the blame for being right, and asked for nothing but the chance to be honest about why. That is what a hero actually is. Not the loudest person in the room. The one lying quietly in the dark carrying an impossible weight who chooses to save a life knowing the world will never thank them for it. Claire Morgan was that person. She always had been, and that was more than enough. Years later, when Claire Morgan was older and her shooting days were behind her, she was asked to speak to a gathering of young officers, and she agreed only on the condition that she could talk about whatever she wanted. They expected a war story. They got something else entirely. She stood in front of them, this small, unremarkable woman that most of them would have walked past on the street, and she asked them a question that had nothing to do with rifles. Who here believes that doing the right thing will be rewarded? A few hands went up, then a few more uncertain, watching each other. Put them down, she said gently, because I'm going to tell you something that took me most of my life to understand, and I'd rather you learn it now than the hard way like I did. The right thing and the rewarded thing are not the same thing. They almost never are. And any code you build for your life that depends on the two of them lining up is a code that's going to fail you the first time they don't. She let that sit. There's an old idea, she went on. Older than any of us, older than this country. The ancient soldiers had a word for it. Virtue. Not virtue the way we use it now, meaning something soft and polite. They meant something harder. They meant doing what was right because it was right and expecting nothing back for it. Not praise, not medals, not even to be remembered. They understood something we've mostly forgotten, which is that the moment you do the right thing in order to be rewarded, you haven't actually done a right thing at all. You've done a transaction, and a transaction can be bought and sold and corrupted and turned. But a person who does right for its own sake, expecting nothing, that person can't be bought because there's nothing to buy. They've already given up the thing everyone else is trying to trade for. One of the young officers raised a hand. But Chief, doesn't that make it meaningless? If nobody ever knows, if you never get anything for it, what's the point? Claire smiled because it was the exact question she had once asked herself on a bench outside a building where her fate had been decided. The point, she said, is that it's the only thing in this entire life that's actually yours. Everything else can be taken. Your rank, they can strip. Your reputation, they can ruin with a single line in a file. Your medals, your titles, your place in the story, all of it belongs to other people because other people gave it to you and other people can take it away. She tapped her own chest. But the knowledge of what you did and why you did it, That's the one thing no one can ever touch. No board can revoke it. No enemy can capture it. No lie can erase it. It lives in you and it dies with you. And for the whole of your life, it is the one possession that is completely and permanently your own. That's not meaningless, son. That's the only thing that isn't. She walked a few steps, gathering herself. History is going to remember the loud ones, she said. It always has. The generals with the statues, the names in the books. And some of them earned it and some of them didn't. And either way, that's not the part that actually holds a civilization together. You want to know what holds it together. It's the quiet ones. The ones history never records. The soldier who held the line when no one was watching. The person who told the truth when a lie would have been easier and safer. The one who did the right thing in a dark room with no witnesses and no reward and no way anyone would ever know. Every decent thing humanity has ever built rests on a foundation of people like that. Anonymous people, unrewarded people. People who chose right over recognition over and over in 10,000 rooms nobody ever saw. She looked around at them. That's the real history, not the statues, the invisible foundation the statues are standing on. A silence had fallen over the room. I'm going to tell you the hardest part now, she said. The part nobody wants to hear. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you and it never pays you back. Sometimes you break a rule that needed breaking and you're right, completely right, and you still take the punishment because the rule has to keep its meaning for everyone else. Sometimes the world is genuinely better because of what you did, and the world will never know it, and you will carry the cost alone until the day you die. She paused. And you have to be at peace with that before the moment comes. Not after. Before, because in the moment itself, there's no time to make peace with anything. The wind is moving and the target is moving, and a life is hanging on one breath, and if you haven't already decided who you are, you'll decide wrong. You'll reach for the safe thing, or the rewarded thing, or the thing that protects you. The only people who do right in the hard moment are the ones who settled the question of who they were a long, long time before the moment ever arrived. She thought of a frozen ridge and a held breath and a man on his knees with children waiting for him at home. I made a choice once. She said that I was told was impossible against an order I was supposed to obey for a stranger I'd never met. And I want to be honest with you about why I could make it. It wasn't courage exactly. It was that I'd already decided years before on a shooting range with my father what kind of person I was going to be. He told me the shot is never about the target. It's about you, whether you can be still, whether you can be calm when everything's screaming. And what he was really teaching me, though I didn't understand it for decades, was that the stillness isn't a skill you find in the moment. It's who you've already become by the time the moment finds you. She looked at them steadily. You're all going to have your mountain someday, some room, some choice, some impossible moment where the right thing and the safe thing point in opposite directions. And when it comes, you won't rise to the occasion. Nobody rises to the occasion. You'll fall to the level of who you already are. So become the right person now. Every small choice, every dull, ordinary day where no one's watching and nothing's at stake, that's where you're actually building the person who'll show up when everything is. She was quiet for a long moment. The world will tell you that the reward is the point, she said finally. That recognition is the measure. That if nobody knows it didn't count. Don't you believe it? Some of the most important things any human being has ever done are things no one ever knew about, done by people whose names are lost forever, who asked for nothing and got nothing and changed everything anyway. That's not a tragedy. That's the highest thing a person can be. To do right in the dark expecting no light. To carry a weight no one will ever help you carry and never once set it down and never once ask to be thanked for it. She straightened. That's not just how you live a good life. That's how a civilization survives. On the backs of the unthanked. On the quiet integrity of people who did the right thing when no one would ever know simply because it was right and because they had decided long before that being right was worth more than being seen. She looked out at all of those young faces at the next generation who would someday stand on their own mountains. You will not always be rewarded for doing right, Chief Petty Officer Claire Morgan said, and her voice was as steady and certain as it had been in the half second before the most impossible shot of her life. Often you will be punished for it. The reward was never the point. The right thing was always the point, and it was always its own reward, and it was always enough. Learn that now, and no board, and no enemy, and no dark room will ever be able to break you. Refuse to learn it, and every reward in the world won't be enough to make you whole. She stepped back from the podium. That's all I came to say, she told them. Now go be the person you'd want on the mountain when everything falls apart. Not because anyone will thank you, because someday, somewhere in a room no one will ever see, a life is going to depend on who you already decided to be. And by then, it will be far too late to decide. She walked out without waiting for the applause, the same way she had walked out of a windowless Pentagon room decades before, carrying the only thing she had ever truly needed, the quiet and unbreakable knowledge of what she had done and why. She had never been the loudest person in the room. She had never needed to be. And that in the end was the whole of it. Heroes are not the ones history remembers. They are the ones who do right in the dark and ask for nothing, whose names are lost and whose deeds endure anyway, holding up the invisible foundation on which everything else is built. Claire Morgan was one of them. She always had been, and she understood at the last that this was not a smaller thing than glory. It was the only thing that had ever truly mattered.